everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of On My Studio Table. Before I tell you about the artwork that's sitting near me, I'd just like to say I hope you enjoyed that little wander around our home looking at the beautiful wattle blossoms. It's actually a type of acacia, and we call it black wattle here because it has a very dark bark, and the bark is very good for natural dyeing. It will actually give you a terracotta colour, and in the old days, sort of in the 1800s, the people that used to tan the skins of cattle and sheep and so on used to use black wattle bark, and it has a natural fungicide in it which would have helped to preserve the leather, and it's just a lovely byproduct that it's actually a dye as well. In fact, I was told that the old skins used to be very red on the leather side because of it. So that's just an interesting little tidbit of history. The blossoms apparently can make a dye too, which I haven't tried, but I'll see if I can find time to do that while they're still in bloom. They are all around in Tasmania, and particularly in northern Tasmania where I live, you just see them everywhere, and it's just so beautiful. And you just feel that spring is around the corner. So beside me, I have a framed picture which I've just picked up from the framers. And in fact, a friend picked it up for me. It's a collage that I did a little while ago, a stitched collage, and it's really something that I enjoyed putting together. It was for a very special occasion. It was the 20th anniversary of my business in October in 2023, and I hosted an exhibition, an invitational exhibition, inviting people to make a piece of art in an A4 size, addressing the problem of finding space in your life. And I called it Paused, with the ED in brackets. And just to find room in busy timetables and maybe a quiet space to do some art and then enter this exhibition. And it's lovely how many of the people who entered used nature as their place of peace and finding space. And as you know, nature is a constant in my work too, and this is no exception. So I made this as an example for this exhibition, and it's about to be exhibited in another exhibition. So it's stitched paper, as I said, mainly cardi paper and I think some watercolour paper, and I've also eco-printed on most of the papers. There is used tea bag paper as well, and also a found kookaburra feather. I found it on the ground and we identified it as belonging to a kookaburra. We hear them a lot. They have a kind of insane laughter, but we just enjoy it, and you often hear it in the mornings and in the evenings. We have one that's been visiting us lately, and it's been sitting on the edge of the bird bath, not so much to have a bath, but as a vantage point to be able to catch lizards and worms and so on. But it's just lovely to see it come and visit, so it did that for several mornings. It's really raining hard today, so we could hear birds, but we didn't see many this morning. So the other thing that I'd like to tell you about this is that I used the tea bag string from my tea bags that I dry to actually stitch the kookaburra feather down, and I think I used it in another part as well. I also deliberately tore it. I've done a series of work starting with an eco print that I accidentally tore, and then I did a deliberate tear, and that was a series of two which have been in a couple of exhibitions and are about to be in another one. And then I used stitch to put them back together. And I also did that with some handmade paper that disintegrated when I eco-printed it, and I stitched it back together like fragments, and they actually sold in a few days' time from having made them. So this one I've left a gap, and I've made the stitch as part of the feature in the gap, and the gap actually references the idea of pausing, so there's a pause visually there. And I also put some writing behind it from my daily journal practice, and that's become the title of this piece also. It's called May I Not Lose This Sense of Awakening. And then I also used my letter stamps to print the word pause onto the tea bag paper. The framer has mounted it really beautifully. My husband helped to choose the colour of the mat, which is called maize and has a texture to it. And I asked him to use dimensional tape to lift the page off the mount so that it has a slight 3D look around the edge, and then he's also done the same with the glass that's actually slightly above the piece. And then the timber, which is a lovely natural colour, just seems to complement the whole thing. So if you want to look him up, he's on Facebook. His name is Don McKellar and his business is called Wombat Burrow. Now, I mentioned that I would say something about the exhibition that this is going to be in. I'm in a group called Circle of 4+, and the numbers vary between 4 and 5 people usually. Currently there are 5, and we are very privileged to be able to have a special exhibition space within the State Quilt Exhibition, which is coming up in September. It's called Island Quilts and it's held in Hobart. So this is one of the things that I'm going to put in our group display. The theme is leaves, and of course I use leaves in most of my work, so nearly anything would fit, I would think. And I didn't think they would allow framed pieces in, but apparently they are allowing that, so that's really good. And this one and the other one I mentioned that I tore, which is called Survival, it's a set of 2, as I said, they will go in as well. And also my migration quilt, which is a family history piece, and I was thinking about the family tree and the leaves on the tree, and I have shared about that in a previous video in this series. The other thing about the quilt show, I'm very excited to tell you that I've been invited to be a judge at the State Quilt Show. This is quite an honour because I've been entering it for years and I have won some awards, but I always felt that my work didn't quite fit in. And then I kind of got over it and thought, no, this is what I make, this is me, I will enter it, and it doesn't matter if it wins or not. I just make it and put it out there. And so it's been lovely that a few times I have won something. But to be a judge and to be asked to do this is quite an honour, and so I'm really thrilled about that. I'm going to go to Hobart next week with my husband. We're going to stay with my sister, and I'll spend 2 days with the 2 other judges judging all the entries. And I have to say that Tasmania really punches above its weight in the quality of the work that's in the quilt show. I went last year and it was absolutely magnificent. So if you're ever in Tasmania and can get to Hobart, or if you live in Tasmania and can get to Hobart, I would highly recommend that you go. It's well worth it. There's also a craft fair, so you can stock up on your threads and fabrics and yarns and so on. And it's just lovely to be with like-minded people as well. There is a cafe too, and they also cater for people that have dietary needs. I'm gluten-free, so I had a lovely lunch there last time. So that's my little bit of exciting news, and I hope that I will see you at the quilt show. I'm going to try and video this for you just holding my device in my hand, so I hope I'm not too wobbly for you. It's a really grey day and it's pouring with rain outside, so I'm trying out my ring light for the first time. I'll try not to wobble too much. Seems to be almost impossible. I need a gimbal, I think. If you remember, I think it was in the last video, I shared a journal page that we did with K3n Chambers of K3n Clothtales, where we couched down either threads or strips of cloth or whatever we felt like onto a background. And I enjoyed it so much that I decided to do another one. So this one is about the same width, but it's about 3 times as long. And I just so enjoyed it. And it took a life of its own and ended up adding some strips in a kind of a random fashion, adding found objects such as these squashed bottle caps that I found on the road, a drink can popper, the inside of a clothes peg, and a hair slide, and then added a bit more stitching just with black thread. So this is going to be quite a few layers by the time I'm finished, because I thought it needed to be part of a bigger piece, and it has kind of morphed into something which I am very happy with and am enjoying working on. I found in one of my tubs a piece of mulberry bark which I had eco-printed with rusty cans and rusty nails, and some leaves which you can see faintly, the brownish orange colours, which would have been from eucalyptus. And then I'm layering it on top of 2 other pieces of fabric which are both quite thin, because I need to be able to stitch through the whole lot eventually. You'll notice a piece of masking tape here and safety pins, and I'll just hold this back. What happens is that the masking tape is removable and can be used 5 times or so, maybe more, before it loses its stickiness, and it just helps you keep your stitching straight if you're stitching straight lines. And the pins of course help to hold the layers together. The cotton fabric is from a friend who is very ill, and she has been decluttering, and she gave me this and other pieces, so I'm very honoured to have them and use them. The background is a very thin wool fabric. It's quite worn, which I think adds to the story of this piece. So I'm just using running stitch. I'm using a lovely thread which is cotton, but it actually looks and feels like wool. I'll just show it to you. It's a flower thread by Jeannie Thompson, and I have quite a few of these, and it's just beautifully soft and lovely to work with, so I'm actually using it for the quilting in this piece. I'll just take you across now. You'll see a piece of cocoon which was hand dyed, not by me. Also this fabric behind the couch strip is hand dyed, but not by me, and same with this strip here. And the colours just seem to go really well with it. They were part of an inspiration pack that I bought from the Thread Studio in Western Australia. And the mulberry bark was from there as well. As I said, I've had that for quite a long time. So I'm just going to roll this back, and you'll see that I've actually patched some silk chiffon onto the cotton and then quilted through that. I used a reverse invisible basting stitch for this. You'll notice also that there are holes in the mulberry bark, and that's why I basted the silk pieces behind the mulberry bark, because I wanted them to show through through the holes. So I will stitch them down so that they are visible, because it's quite creased and stitching will hold it down. But I'm not going to stitch down all the creases. I quite like that effect. So that's another thing that's going to help add interest to this. This strip I will rearrange and then stitch down, possibly using couching methods again, and some of it will probably go over this silk cocoon as well. And I do love the frayed edges, well, uneven edges, not really frayed. It's how the bark has been harvested, I guess, and I'll leave them pretty much as they are. For the edges, once I'm finished all the stitching, I'm going to trim off the wool that's on the back of the quilt, and then I'll probably face it so that the edge is actually here where the cotton finishes, and I think that will finish it off quite nicely. I love the colours too. They're such warm natural colours, and I loved mixing the materials too, using some of my eco-printed things, some from my friend, and some from an inspiration pack. And I did forget to mention also that the couch strips on the long thin piece are wool, and they're offcuts from other projects. Some of them are seams. One of them is the edge of a blanket with the original blanket stitch still on it. And I think at the bottom the swirly bit is a silk selvage, and then I've used some torn cotton t-shirt which I use to tie up my bundles when I'm eco-dyeing. The next thing I'm going to show you is the next entry in my daily stitching journal. And as I've said a number of times, this has been such a joy to work on. So I'll just show you the latest one. Got a blank page there which I'll have to fill in. So here is the latest one. They're out of order, but I don't think that really matters. We had a theme called The Nature of Cloth, and it was about responding to the pieces of cloth that we might decide to use. And as you know, fabric is very textural, and often the reason we love working with it is because of how it feels, as well as what we can create with it. So I chose a few pieces and I tested myself to use a colour I don't use very often, which is pink. K3n used pink in hers, and I thought, well, maybe I should do that too, without copying her, doing my own thing. And I had some beautiful vintage kimono fabric that had a bit of pink in it. So I tore a piece of that, and I had a little scrap which I put here, and this was part of the same lining, but I had naturally dyed that piece. This is a piece of cotton that was eco-printed by a friend, and behind it is some wool which is also naturally dyed. And one of the things that we were asked to do was a couched circle, not a couch circle, sorry, a whip-stitched circle. And that basically means that you do a running stitch and then you weave another thread through the running stitch without going into the cloth. And then after that, I just went my own way really with the stitching, which is what I often do. So I added some feather stitch, some fly stitch to represent all the wild ducks we've seen lately. I think it's because we've had quite a bit of rain during winter and all the creeks and the dams are full of water. I have never seen so many wild ducks around, at least not for many years. Then at the bottom, to represent grass, because we have a lot of pasture around us, I just did some stab stitch with some hand-dyed merino wool thread that I have. These other ones are different cottons, stranded cottons. So I really enjoyed working on that. And the bit of writing that I chose to go with it, I only wrote the other day when I saw 5 ducks flying past very early in the morning above the creek line. 5 wild ducks fly past, silhouettes against a watercolour sky. I am content. And I guess that's the secret of enjoying your life, is to be content as much as possible. Sometimes because of your circumstances, sometimes in spite of them.